There is a sentence buried in a sermon preached nearly 700 years ago. The preacher was a Dominican friar, a professor, a man who had walked across mountains and argued before popes. He stood in front of a group of nuns in 14th century Cologne and said something so strange that the church would later put it on a list of heresies. He said, "The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. One eye, one seeing, one knowing, one love." He didn't soften it. He didn't explain it away. He said it, and apparently he said it to an offertory box when no one else was around to hear it, because he had to say it whether or not anyone was listening. His name was Meister Eckhart. And the thing he was trying to tell people in sermon after sermon, in treatise after treatise, for more than 30 years, is something most of us have never been taught, and something that cannot be unheard once you actually take it in. This is a summary of the complete mystical works of Meister Eckhart, translated by Maurice O'Connell Walshy. It is one of the most radical, most misunderstood, and most quietly necessary spiritual texts in the history of Western thought. And if you are lying awake tonight with the feeling that something important is missing, not in your schedule, not in your achievements, but somewhere deeper than that, this book might be the thing that names it. If summaries like this one are useful to you, subscribing takes one tap, and there is a new one every week. Here is the problem this book is quietly solving. You have been taught your whole life that the spiritual life is a project. You do the rituals. You follow the rules. You accumulate the good deeds. You earn your way toward something, toward heaven, toward peace, toward God, toward whatever you call the thing you're reaching for. The path is long, and you are not yet good enough. You keep trying. You mostly fall short. You try again. Eckhart looked at that arrangement and said, the project itself is the problem, not the trying, not the sincerity, the assumption underneath it, the assumption that God is somewhere over there, and you are over here, and the distance between you is what sin and effort and time are for. He didn't believe that. He preached against it, in plain German, to illiterate nuns and to university scholars, in marketplaces and in churches, until the Archbishop of Cologne had him hauled before the Inquisition. He died in 1328, before the verdict came down. The papal bull condemning him was issued a year after his death. He was not bothered. He had said what he needed to say. What he needed to say was this: God is not waiting for you somewhere else. God is already in the ground of your soul. The question is not how to get there. The question is how to stop running away. That question is what this entire book is about. The birth that never stops happening. The first and deepest idea in Eckhart's sermons is what he calls the eternal birth. He takes a text from the Christmas liturgy. While all things lay in the midst of silence, there descended down into me from on high, from the royal throne, a secret word, and he turns it into something that has nothing to do with a calendar date. The birth of God in the soul, he says, is not something that happened once, 2,000 years ago in Bethlehem. It is not even something that happens to especially holy people in moments of mystical ecstasy. It is happening right now, continuously, without interruption, in the deepest part of every human soul. He calls this deepest part the ground of the soul. Sometimes he calls it the spark, sometimes the castle. It is the part of you that has never been entirely captured by the noise of the world. The part that cannot be described or imaged or touched by any creature. And it is in that part, and only in that part, that God is constantly being born. Here is what makes this radical. Eckhart says human nature and divine nature are one, not similar, not close, one. Christ did not take on the nature of one particular man. He took on human nature, which is universal. And because it is universal, it is the same in him as it is in you. Therefore, and this is the sentence that got him condemned, God the Father begets the Son in your soul in exactly the same way that he begets the Son in eternity. No more, no less, the same birth. When his audience objected that this seemed to make every person equal to Christ, Eckhart nodded. More or less, yes. He was not being reckless. He was being precise. He was saying that the hunger you feel for meaning, the restlessness that keeps you awake, the sense that something large and true is always just out of reach, that is not confusion. That is recognition. You are not looking for something foreign. You are circling back towards something you already are. But most of us never get there. And the reason is not sin exactly, it is noise. The problem with your powers. Eckhart has a useful distinction that nobody teaches in school. He says the soul has two parts. The powers, the faculties of thinking, remembering, imagining, feeling, sensing, and the ground, which is deeper than all of them. The powers are not bad. They are how you navigate the world. But they are always in motion. They grab at images, attach to objects, drag in impressions from outside. They are, by design, scattered. The ground of the soul is not like that. Nothing can enter it. No image, no creature, no word, no memory. It is pure. And it is precisely because it is pure that God can act there. The problem, Eckhart explains in Sermon 2, is that most people spend their entire spiritual lives trying to reach God through their powers. They think hard about God. They imagine the attributes of God: wisdom, goodness, eternity. They perform devotions. They feel the emotions of devotion. They mistake the feelings for the thing. And Eckhart says, very gently, that this is the one place where trying harder makes it worse. He tells a story about a pagan scholar who was so absorbed in mathematics that a man came to him with a sword and demanded his name, and the scholar could not even speak. He was too deep in concentration to hear. Eventually, the man cut off his head. That is not a story about the dangers of scholarship. That is a story about what total focus actually looks like. And Eckhart is saying, if a man can go that deep into geometry, how much deeper could you go if you turned that same focus inward, past the thinking, past the feeling, past even the imagining, into the silence where the birth is always happening? The practical takeaway is not comfortable. He says the soul must be still, not meditating on holy thoughts, not cultivating feelings of devotion. Still, empty, receptive, because God does not work through images. God works in the ground, without means, without likeness, in the place that cannot be filled with anything else. You have to get out of the way. This is the part of the book that stops most readers. You mean I shouldn't try? No, he says. He means you should try until trying stops being something you do and becomes something you are. Gelassenheit, the word that changes everything. There is a German word that runs through every page of this book like a quiet river. The word is Gelassenheit. It means, roughly, letting go, or self-abandonment, or release, or, in the most literal translation, being let go of oneself. Eckhart did not invent it, but he made it the center of his entire teaching. And understanding it properly is the difference between reading this book as a collection of strange medieval theology and reading it as the most practical instruction manual for a human life that you have ever encountered. Here is what Gelassenheit is not. It is not passivity. It is not despair. It is not giving up on doing good things in the world. It is not the kind of detachment that turns you cold and distant. Here is what it is. In the Talks of Instruction, a collection of advice he gave to young Dominican novices around the year 1298. When he was still a friar in Erfurt, Eckhart says something that sounds almost too simple. Wherever you flee, you will find obstacles unless you first flee yourself. A novice comes to him and says, "I can't find peace here. I need to go somewhere else. A different monastery, a cell in the desert, somewhere quiet." Eckhart says, "The reason you can't find peace is you are carrying yourself everywhere you go. The restlessness is not in the place. It is in the assumption that you need your preferences satisfied, your comfort maintained, your sense of self protected. That assumption, even when it is entirely reasonable, even when it is entirely unconscious, is the thing that keeps you out of the ground." Gelassenheit means releasing that assumption, not performing its release, not announcing it, just actually letting it go. He tells the novices, if you gave up a kingdom and the entire world, but did not give up your self-will, you have given up nothing. But if you give up your self-will, even if you kept 1,000 kingdoms, you have given up everything. The man or woman who reaches this state, and he is realistic that few do, and no one stays there permanently, that person finds something strange happening. Whatever they do becomes equally effortless. They can be in the market or in the church, in silence or in noise. And it makes no difference, because they are not searching for God in the conditions. They have God with them, or rather, they are so aligned with God's will that the distinction stops mattering. You can do this, he says. It is not a gift reserved for saints. It is a skill, like writing or playing a stringed instrument. You practice until you don't have to practice. You give your attention until attention becomes your nature. The man who left God for God. Now here is where the book gets genuinely difficult and genuinely extraordinary. Eckhart has a favorite paradox that appears in several sermons. He takes a line from St. Paul, "I would be willing to be eternally separated from God for the sake of my friend and for God's sake," and he does something startling with it. He says Paul was not speaking loosely. He meant it literally. And it is actually the highest possible statement of spiritual maturity. He explains, most people love God for the gifts God gives, the consolation, the peace, the sweetness of prayer, the feeling of closeness. These are real. Eckhart doesn't dismiss them. He calls them enticements God, using warmth and emotion to draw people in who aren't yet ready for anything deeper. But at some point, he says, the real work begins, and the real work is this. Can you love God when you feel nothing? Can you keep going when the consolation disappears, when God seems absent, when prayer feels like talking to a wall? Paul, Eckhart says, had reached the point where he was willing to have even the felt experience of God taken away, if that was what God willed. Not because he didn't love God, because he loved God more than he loved the experience of God. And in that willingness, in that total surrender of even the desire for spiritual consolation, something happened. Paul stopped receiving God and started being one with God. The distinction between the lover and the beloved disappeared. Not because Paul became God in some grandiose sense, but because he had finally gotten entirely out of the way. Eckhart calls this the breakthrough. and he distinguishes it carefully from the outflowing, which is the moment when God created the world and individual souls came into being. The breakthrough is the return, the soul going back through God to the Godhead. And here is the strange thing about the Godhead, as Eckhart describes it. The Godhead, by which he means not the Trinity, not the personal God, but the nameless abyss from which even the Trinity flows, is pure stillness. No action, no movement, not working, not willing, not creating, just being, in absolute simplicity. He says, God and Godhead are as different as heaven and earth. God works. God creates, loves, forgives, speaks. God is the personal face of the divine. The Godhead does no work, it simply is. And the soul, in the breakthrough, returns to that, returns to a unity so pure that there is nothing left to be separated from. He said this from a pulpit in Middle High German in 1305. The Church was not pleased. Comfort in Darkness, the book written for a grieving queen. Around 1308, the year a young queen of Hungary named Agnes watched her father be stabbed to death by his own nephew Eckhart, wrote a book for her. He called it the Book of Divine Comfort. Agnes was in her late 20s. She had lost her father. She had already lost her husband years before. She was, by all accounts, a woman of genuine faith and genuine grief, and she needed something real, not something decorative. Eckhart gave her something real. He organized the book around a single principle. All suffering comes from attachment to things that can be lost. Not because attachment is evil, but because you are giving to creatures the love that belongs to God. He says it plainly. A man who loses 100 marks and keeps thinking about the 40 he lost will never be comforted, because he keeps turning toward the loss. But if he turns toward the 60 he still has, he will find something to hold on to. This is not positive thinking. It is not cheerfulness imposed on grief. It is a reorientation of attention from what has been taken to what remains, and ultimately from what was temporarily lent to the one who lent it. He writes, God never gives anything to creatures, he only lends it. The sun, the earth, your father, your health, your peace, these were never yours. They were lent for a time by the one who is their true owner. And when the loan is called back, the question is not whether it is fair. The question is whether you were ever confused about who the actual owner was. This is not coldness. It is clarity. And for Agnes, who spent the next 56 years of her life as a widow in religious life, quietly founding hospitals and living without the things she had lost, it seems to have worked. She died at 84. Her biographers call her serene. What Goodwill can do? There is one more teaching in this book that deserves its own space, because it is the thing most likely to change how you treat yourself. In the Talks of Instruction, Eckhart addresses something that troubles almost everyone who takes the spiritual life seriously: the gap between what you intend to do and what you actually do. You intend to be patient, you lose your temper. You intend to pray. You spend an hour looking at your phone. You intend to help. You help yourself instead. And the conclusion most people draw is, I am not serious. I am not good. I keep failing. Eckhart says, look more carefully at the will. He says, with the will, I can do all things. If I had a true and complete will to feed all the poor in the world, and truly had no power to do so, I have done it in the sight of God. Because virtue does not live in the deed, it lives in the will. Holiness is not in what we do, it is in what we are. And what we are is measured by the direction of the deepest will. This is not a license for laziness. He is not saying you can just want things and skip the doing. He is saying that the person who keeps turning toward God with an honest will, who keeps releasing self-interest even when they fail, who keeps choosing the direction that person is already further along than they think. The sin they regret is less important than the direction they keep choosing. He has a remarkable line about repentance. He says, "Temporal repentance drags a man down into ever greater sorrow and leads to despair. But divine repentance rises immediately back toward God. It acknowledges the wrong, establishes an unshakable will not to repeat it, and then lifts itself up without wallowing. The difference matters. One repentance is about you, the other is about God." You know which one Eckhart recommends. On Detachment, the short treatise that says everything. Near the end of the book is a short piece called On Detachment. Its authorship is slightly disputed. Some scholars think it may have been written by a close student rather than Eckhart himself, but the teaching is unmistakably his. He argues that detachment, Abgeschiedenheit in German, a word that means something like a cutting away from, a being apart from, is higher than love, higher than mercy, higher than humility. This is a scandalous claim in a tradition that considers love the highest virtue, but his reasoning is careful. Love, he says, compels you. It bends you toward the beloved. It moves you outward. Mercy does the same. It bends you toward the suffering. Even humility bends you toward lowness and self-negation. Detachment does not bend. It stands still. And because it stands still, everything can come to it. God is drawn to detachment the way fire is drawn to wood, because detachment is the only thing that perfectly mirrors God's own stillness. He writes, "A detached heart is so near to nothing that nothing can become too small for it, and nothing can too fully occupy it." This is the practical conclusion of the whole book. Not that you should feel nothing, not that you should care about nothing, but that your caring should not rule you. Your preferences should not be the axis around which the day turns. Your pain should be real and acknowledged, and then offered, not clutched. He saw people his whole life who had real faith and real intelligence, but who could not rest. They moved from monastery to monastery. They changed their practices. They sought the right spiritual director. They ran from their suffering. And he kept saying, "Wherever you go, you take yourself with you. The question is not where you are. The question is who you are when you are there." The offertory box. Near the end of Sermon 56, Eckhart says something that is, depending on how you read it, either the most arrogant thing a preacher ever said or the most honest. He has just finished describing the moment of the breakthrough, the soul's return to the Godhead, the place where God becomes and unbecomes, where all identity dissolves into pure unity. He has said things that would cost him his reputation and nearly his life. And then he closes with this: "Whoever has understood this sermon, good luck to him. If no one had been here, I would have had to preach it to this offertory box." The offertory box, the donation container, a piece of wood. He would have preached it to wood because the sermon needed to be said, not because it would benefit the box, because the truth needs to be spoken regardless of whether it lands. That is a man who had arrived somewhere, not in a self-congratulatory sense, in the sense of someone who no longer needed the audience. He had gone out of himself far enough that the speaking was simply what was being called for, and the reception was not the point. That is what Gelassenheit looks like when it is fully lived. There is a question worth carrying into sleep tonight. Not whether you agree with Eckhart, Whether you are Catholic, whether you are Buddhist, whether you are nothing at all. The question is simpler. What is it that you keep running toward, and what is it that you keep running from, and is it possible that both of them are the same thing, seen from different sides? Eckhart thought so. He thought the restlessness and the longing were the same impulse, the soul circling back toward the ground it never actually left. He spent 30 years preaching to people who mostly didn't understand him, and he kept going because the word, as he called it, was in him and had to come out, not for his sake, just because it was there. That seems to be enough.